Hi biology students, Ms. Dreesen here. Today we are going to be going through the Learning Target 1 notes on biology and properties of life. So this is on Learning Target 1, which says I can define biology and list the characteristics that describe living things. Feel free to ignore the fact that this says 1 through 3. We're focusing on just Learning Target 1 today. So what exactly is biology? Biology is the branch of science that studies specifically living things, also known as organisms. But what exactly is life? What does it mean to be alive? What is it that defines life? How can we tell that one thing is alive and another thing is not? Most people have an intuitive understanding of what it means for something to be alive. However, it's surprisingly hard to come up with a precise definition of what is life. Because of this, many definitions allow us to separate things from living things from non-living things, but they don't necessarily pin down what exactly life is. So to make this separation, we must come up with a list of properties that are, as a group, unique characteristics of just living things. So let's talk about the first property of life. The first property of life is organization. Living things are very organized, meaning they contain specialized, coordinating parts. All living organisms are made up of one or more cells, which are considered the fundamental units of life. Even unicellular organisms are complex. Unicellular means one cell. So for example, bacteria, a single bacterium is one living cell and is a living organism. So even unicellular organisms are complex, and inside each cell, atoms make up molecules, which make up cell organelles and structures. In multicellular organisms like you and I, similar cells form tissues, and tissues in turn work together to create organs that serve specific functions in our body. Multicellular organisms, such as us, are made up of many, many cells. The cells in multicellular organisms may be specialized to do a very specific job, and they are organized into these tissues. For example, if you touch your skin is an example of epithelial tissue, meaning it's the outside of your body. The second property of life is called metabolism. Life depends on an enormous number of interlocking chemical reactions. These reactions make it possible for organisms to do work, such as moving around or catching prey, as well as growing, reproducing, and maintaining the structure of our bodies. Living things must use energy and consume nutrients to carry out the chemical reactions that sustain life. The sum total of the biochemical reactions occurring in an organism is called its metabolism. So essentially in metabolism, we use energy by consuming nutrients that power chemical reactions. The third property of life is called homeostasis. Living organisms can regulate their internal environment to maintain the relatively narrow range of conditions needed for cell function. For instance, your body temperature needs to be relatively close to 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So the goal here is to maintain a stable internal environment, one example being your body temperature. And the maintenance of a stable internal environment, even in a changing environment, is known as homeostasis. The fourth property of life is growth. Living organisms undergo regulated growth. Individual cells can become larger in size, and multicellular organisms like us accumulate many cells through cell division, so cells can multiply. You yourself started out as a single cell in the process of fertilization, and now you have trillions of cells in your body. Growth depends on processes that build large, complex molecules, such as proteins and DNA, the genetic material. The fifth property of life is reproduction. Living organisms can reproduce themselves to create new organisms. Reproduction can either be asexual, involving a single parent organism, or sexual, requiring two parents. Single-celled organisms, like the dividing bacterium here in this picture, can reproduce themselves by splitting into two, whereas we need, as humans, two different types of cells to combine and fertilize a cell. So the goal in reproduction is essentially to create new organisms. The sixth property of life is called response. Living organisms respond to stimuli or changes in their environment. For instance, if you touch a hot stove or flame, you quickly pull your hand back. Many plants will turn towards the sun, and unicellular organisms may migrate toward a source of nutrients or away from something dangerous. The ability to respond to our environment is one property of life. The seventh property of life, The seventh property of life is evolution. Populations of living organisms can undergo evolution, meaning that the genetic makeup of a population may change over generations. In some cases, evolution involves natural selection, in which one trait, such as dark fur color or a narrow beak, helps an organism survive better than others and reproduce better in a particular environment. Over generations, that beneficial trait may provide a fitness advantage and become more and more common in the population. And then over time, that population becomes more suited to that environment. So in this picture, you can see a common ancestor, that being a brown bird. And depending on different environments, that one brown bird and its ancestors can form multiple different types. Is this list absolute? Is it perfect? Believe it or not, it is not absolute or perfect. It is possible that there are other properties of life that we still have not discovered yet, and it's possible that these may change over time. We are still defining what exactly counts as life. One example that you can think of is the mule. A mule is the offspring of a female horse and a male donkey. A mule cannot make more baby mules. But does that make it not a living thing? No. So in this case, the mule doesn't have one of those properties of life, but I would still count it as living. So as you can see, this is not an exactly perfect list of principles, but it helps us get started at more easily separating what is living, for example, a mule, and what is not living, for example, your iPad. As a summary, please describe something new that you learned today. Now that you're finished with your notes, I recommend pausing the video, making sure you have everything filled into your notes worksheet. Now you can use your notes worksheet to take the notes quiz, which you will find in today's Schoology folder. Thank you for watching. If you have questions, send me a message, or otherwise go ahead and attempt the quiz.